Spoiler warning. The following discussion will contain spoilers. We recommend checking out the movie first, then coming back to hang with us. But if you don't care about that, glad to have you here.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the 25 Days of Real Christmas, a series where we review some old and new holiday favorite films. My name's Kevin.
And I'm John.
And we are your Real Movie Guys. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Tokyo Godfathers. On Christmas Eve, 3 homeless people living in the streets of Tokyo discover a newborn baby among the trash and set out to find its parents. John, I'm excited. Anytime I get to have you watch anime, I just get so happy. I got more energy than I think we've had this whole season, because I'm like, you know what? John gets to watch an anime movie, and he has no choice. He's got to do it. He can't say, oh, yeah, I'll watch it. Yeah, you're right. I'll have to check that out. No, he's got to watch for the channel, so I know he had to watch it for a fact. The last time I got him to watch something anime related was the Alita review, which, if you haven't seen that, check that out. Even that, he didn't know it was an anime at the time, and when he found out, I think he was a little aggravated that I had him watch it. Now, John, this is a pretty popular Christmas movie. If you look at a lot of, Christmas movie lists, I always feel like Tokyo Godfathers pops on there. Now, wouldn't you agree? I feel like, because we were going over, what movies we should talk about, and you were like, yeah, I've actually heard of Tokyo Godfathers before.
Comes up on some of those big lists, even top 25 lists of Christmas movies.
Yeah.
It pops up there, which I thought was very interesting because I never heard of it before that.
No. And then when he heard that I knew what it was, he got really scared. So this movie isn't your typical anime. While it does have some trappings of an anime, I wouldn't say it falls really into that territory a lot. Now, John, just by watching this, and for the people at home, we did watch the most recent dub version of this. We didn't watch it subtitled. Sorry, we weren't genuine to the culture. I do like dub over sub on most occasions. I will watch a subtitled every now and then. Now, John, what were some of your impressions of this? Not being an anime fan and not really knowing what to expect, what did you think early onset of this film?
I thought it was very unusual starting point.
Okay.
Especially when they start off when they find the baby in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
And just the interaction between the 3 homeless people.
Right.
It was very confusing at first.
Okay.
But it was interesting. I felt intrigued after the first 10 minutes. I felt intrigued into this movie.
All right, so it got your attention, you'd say, right away, right? It didn't really linger too long?
No. And I thought that was really good. And I noticed the art style of the movie seemed very decent. I liked it the way it was. The way that they had the city and they had the buildings and the trash.
Mm-hmm.
And just the people, how they were animated and stuff. I thought that was pretty good.
I'm glad you like that. So before we get into that, the only thing I want to touch on is this is actually made by one of my favorite directors of all time. Writers of all time, Satoshi Kon. For those who don't know, Satoshi Kon, he's passed away now. He only actually made 4 films. He made Tokyo Godfathers, Millennium Actress, Perfect Blue, and Paprika. Not in that order, but those were the movies that he made. So he also made an anime called Paranoia Agent. It was the only anime he ever made. To Satoshi Kon, for some reason, he has his pulse on the world, right? He has his pulse on the culture. So when he makes something, he always has something to speak about. And Tokyo Godfathers is no different, in my opinion. Tokyo Godfathers is a masterpiece. And like you said, just right off the bat, you noticed you like the art style a lot. Now, what about the art style and the animation spoke out to you? What did you think was made it unique than it's something else you may have seen?
I guess the character design with the people, the way that they were dressed seemed very almost like a cool animated style.
Right. So did you like the expressions from the people? Now for anime, it's not, as someone who doesn't watch too much anime, you watch a lot of Western animation, of course. You love Disney. So did you find their expressions strange? The way they spoke and the way they exaggerated the way they would speak and their mannerisms. How did you relate to that animation? Did you really like it? Did you think it was weird and confusing? How did you land with that?
I mean, I think it was kind of normal, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
That's understandable. I just wanted to see where you stood with that. Only reason I bring it up is the animation I think is beautiful in this movie. And a lot of it's traditional, anime style. The eyes, the faces, the exaggerated features when they speak. And when something emotional happens, everyone's either over the top in one way or the other, whether it's sad or it's happy. Whatever the case is, it's exaggerated. But the color in this movie is so vibrant and dull at the same time. You have the neons of the city with the contrast to the dark colors used in this movie. I've never seen Tokyo so beautiful and ugly at the same time. You know, especially in an animated film, I feel like it's very hard to make that come across. And more so than just the characters themselves, just the fact that they're able to play off those two styles to me is very visually impressive. To show the city is almost magical in its own way, even though at the same time it's extremely dark and just like dank and gross. It's also got a little bit of magic in it, and I kind of think that speaks for the whole movie overall. Let's go into this just a little more. The plot is unique, but in a lot of standards, but it's also not unique in a lot of standards too. I would, if I were to describe this movie to somebody, I'd like to say it's an urban fairy tale. And to me, when I look at this movie, it's a variation of a couple different stories. You have your variation of the Three Wise Men story, for sure. I mean, that's undoubtable. Three people having to escort a baby, or, you know, the wise men are finding a baby. They have to escort a baby to the mother. Also, it plays with the Charles Dickens stories. It has that essence of Great Expectations built in, but even more so, A Christmas Carol, as things I think that are straight up lifted from A Christmas Carol in this. One of my favorite scenes is when Jin, he's the hard drinker, cynical older man of the group, he finds a bum laying homeless in the street and he's dying. And essentially that's like the ghost of Christmas future visiting him, right? It's showing what's going to happen to him if he kind of goes off the beaten path, right? Like if he doesn't go ahead and help this baby and stay with his family, he's going to end up dying alone in a tent somewhere all by himself. And that's essentially kind of what that does, right? It's really going with the whole Christmas Carol storytelling. I think that's ingenious. And especially for these stories not being Japanese well-known stories that I think that Japan would have familiarized themselves with, it's really impressive to see. You can argue almost maybe this movie is made more for a Western audience than a Japanese audience. I don't know. Would you make that argument, John? Like you were, compared to a normal anime for you, do you think there was more for you to relate to in this movie than, say, like another Japanese film?
Yeah, definitely. I also thought that this movie can connect to people on many different levels too.
Mm-hmm.
Through like just the story that it's telling, and like you were saying too, all that stuff that they take away from other different places and
Right.
different stories.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was like an awesome way to like make this movie.
Right. It's a good amalgamation of different things. And like I said, Satoshi Kon really has his pulse on what's going on in the world, I think, at the time. This movie came out in 2003, so he wanted to touch, I think, on things that weren't the typical story. How many movies do you know of, John, especially around this time, that dealt with the homeless? Do we ever really see a movie talking about homeless people and what they have to deal with on a daily basis? I, for one, really can't think of anything.
No, I feel like that's always a taboo topic.
It is, right? And then, not even that, homosexuality at the time, to actually even go into that as such a, in Japan, where Japan's very strict with its, you know, how it speaks on homosexuality, and they shouldn't have those kind of things, of course, I'm against that, but in 2003, I think it was very strict at that time, so these are all very taboo subjects. Immigration, just immigration in general, how immigrants are treated when they speak to people that don't speak the language and are new to the country, and how they're treated. He touches on things that are just very taboo, and it's very surprising to see that in this kind of film, animated, live action, whatever you want it to be. Again, those are very different subjects, especially to relate it to around a holiday film is very interesting to me. So what makes this a Christmas movie is probably what you're asking yourself. In some ways, you can almost make the argument it's not a Christmas movie. I beg to differ. This is probably one of the most Christmas films I think we've watched in a lot of ways. It's not traditional at all by any means. It's not telling the traditional story. Its take on Christmas is the most interesting because while Christmas is a holiday that is typically celebrated with others, this film goes down a different path where it reflects on everyone's introspective journey and where they are in their life. Each of these characters go through a unique journey throughout this movie, and they all come from very different perspectives. But for some reason, they're all united as one. They feel like, for being the most different, they feel like the most well-oiled family I've seen in a lot of movies, and especially a lot of these fake holiday movies where it's like, oh, joy, we're giving each other gifts and stuff. You got a couple, 3 homeless bums having a good time, you know, just they love each other and care about each other genuinely, and they feel like what a family should feel like. And not even that, they're able to like introspectively find themselves. I really just want to just dive deep into the characters just real quick. Now, John, which out of the characters would you say is your favorite out of the three main characters? You have Jin, who is the cynical hard drinker, Hannah, the optimistic over-the-top transgender, and Miyuki, which is the teenage runaway. Which of the three would you say was like the most interesting out of those characters for you?
I'd probably have to go with Jim.
Okay.
I felt like Jim had a very interesting, like, just a way that he looks on stuff and the way he outputs everything. And
yeah, we've talked about the cynical Christmas. We had our Bad Santa film where everything was downtrodden. Jim was kind of like that, right? He was kind of Mr. Cynical Christmas himself, just against the world. You know, he lost his family, he lost everything, so he didn't want anything else, right? He wanted complete detachment from the world, but he always kept finding himself not really wanting that. He always had that semblance of, you know, maybe one day I will make it right. One day I'll be able to go back and be with my family. He was a much deeper character than you would have anticipated, for sure. You see some really good interactions with him. He tells everyone in the beginning he was a bicycle racer, and you find out later on he wasn't actually that. He bet on bicycles. He bet on races. He was just a filthy, degenerate gambler who lost his family, and his wife and daughter didn't die. His wife left him with their daughter, and he just became homeless and never wanted to find them again. Meanwhile, his daughter was kind of looking for him. She really did care about him. And when he found that out, that kind of changed his perspective on everything because he was looking for her too. So there's a lot of like deep introspective research going on there on his part into himself to see why he drinks and to see he really doesn't want to be alone. You know, he loves the new family he found and he does love his past too. Like he doesn't want to be alone. You know, he really wants to have people around him. And then you have Hannah, who I think is a really strong character, you know, for the LGBTQ plus community, especially around this time. You wouldn't see a lot of characters like this. She's very positive, optimistic. She's looked down as weird and ugly by society a lot of the time, you know, you can tell, but she kind of just shakes it off. She's like, whatever, that's the least of my worries, to be honest with you. If you're worried that I'm a transgender, you know, that there's worse things on my mind than that right now. I want to have a daughter. I want to have my own family. And her finding this baby kind of just encapsulated a dream of hers. She gets to have a child if it's just for a limited amount of time. But you also see that she just wants to have a family too. She wants to be loved and wanted. They go to some crazy destinations in this movie for sure. We go to a transgender strip club. They go there and, you know, find out about her family and her past. And she had a husband and he died. It goes a lot of different directions with this movie, but you feel for Hannah. Like when she was happy, I was genuinely happy. When she had her sad moments, when she was starting to realize that life maybe wasn't as good as she wanted it to be or where she wanted to be exactly, you can kind of relate to her in some respects. You know, you can kind of see where she's coming from on her journey, whether it's just being transgender, but not even that making her identity, but just her not being where she wanted to be in life. You know, there's other things she wanted, and she's just having a hard time getting there, and you can really relate to that. And then you have the last character, who I would argue I think is the weakest of the characters, in my opinion. You have Miyuki, who's the young girl. Her story's kind of strange, I think, overall, even maybe more strange than the other ones, if you really think about it. She's just a teenage runaway. Her father is a police officer who was very strict. She had a bunch of cats. The father killed one of the cats, I guess. That's what it's alluded to. And then she stabbed her father and ran away. I'm like, oh crap. When that revelation came later on, I'm like, oh, that's pretty dark. It's kind of good to see. She comes from the perspective of she has a home to go back to. She has a family who she doesn't think wants her, but they do. I feel like she does know that, but she's not ready to go back yet because she's too afraid of her past and what she's done. And she also loves the new family she's created too. Again, there's a lot of moving parts. There's just a lot of really good nature themes. And one of the big themes is just there's good in human nature. I don't know if you would agree with that. Like if you do a favor for somebody else, it keeps paying it forward, right? I think that's something we've talked about even in Klaus when we reviewed that film. Just one good turn deserves another, and that's kind of what this movie goes through, I think, a lot of the time. That's the Christmas spirit, right? If you want to really nail it on the head, doing good for others, it's good nature towards man, and that's what this movie is. It just shows the kindness that people really do have within, and it's special to see, even from the most unlikely of places, coming from homeless people. They're still people too, and they can still do great things that help out society. It's not that they're not in their situation because they want to be, but it's because they've been put in there in a lot of respects. One interesting thing, now I want to get your take on this, John. This movie touches a little bit on religion. Hana is shown as being very religious. Ironically, even though she's transgender, and religion would probably outcast her for her choices in life, or, you know, the path that she's down. but she's the most religious out of all the group. And a lot of things happen in this movie. Now, are they coincidences? Are they religion? The movie never really gives you an answer if there's like a divine power or if it's just a coincidence. Where did you land on that, John? How do you feel? Do you feel like it was just a coincidence, or do you think there was something like magical going on in this movie?
No, I think it was just a coincidence.
I don't know. I mean, I like to think maybe it was, but at the same time, you wonder like what Satoshi Kon's take maybe on religion is. I feel like he was maybe alluding to there is another power. It's kind of hard to argue, like when Jin gets beaten in the street and then he's found by, the transgender, one of the people who work at the transgender bar, and they help him. Or even at the end of the movie, right? The mother's going to commit suicide with the baby. Ends up, Hana saves her, and then the wind blows the curtain and it just pulls her just enough in the air so she lands perfectly safe. You gotta ask those questions. Is there a divine power? This movie doesn't give an answer. It kind of leads you to your own conclusions, but again, I kind of like how it touches on that. That's not something you would typically see especially again, a Japanese animated movie. For sure, you wouldn't see something like this. I think even more so, it's just the fact that this is kind of a comedy. I think maybe more of heart than anything else. I think I laughed a lot more than I would think in this kind of movie. I was really laughing at a lot of scenes in this film, especially the banter between the three of them. I thought that was fantastic. Before we wrap up, though, there are a couple things that are negative about this film. Just a couple things I want to touch on. I think some of the dialogue is a little bit too heavy at times. I feel like we got bogged down by a lot of really long sequences of just talking, right? I think there are just a lot of scenes where it's just overindulging, I feel like, itself. Kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie, where it's just long scenes of dialogue that are trivial to the plot and don't mean anything. A lot of it has to do with like when they're in their house with the homeless in the village there where they have the tent. They just have some like really long sequences of dialogue that really don't mean anything, right? I feel like they don't add anything to the plot, and a lot of their like side banter really doesn't add anything, I think, to the overall story. You could probably trim this movie down a little bit. I could see that for sure. Is it unnecessary completely? Maybe not. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think you could trim it. I don't think it needed necessarily all that long-winded dialogue.
No, I think that goes to like the one negative that I would have for this movie is I felt like maybe it was a tad too long.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it comes in pretty long, right? At this
an hour
point?
and 32 minutes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not the longest movie I've ever seen, but I could see where someone could come from that perspective. Only because the pace does kind of slow down at parts where there's just a lot of dialogue, a lot of talking, a lot of back and forth, and not really too much plot progression. It kind of comes in like heaps. Another thing I would say is, I don't know, some things did feel a little bit off for me, so I am curious to see what John thinks. Now, do you think some things were lost in translation at all with this movie? Like, do you think we couldn't maybe connect with some of the things in this movie? Like, I don't know, maybe their relationship to Christmas, it didn't feel that important to me. So I wonder if that's like a cultural thing where I know Christmas is imbued in the plot and you can't deny that, but like they kind of don't treat it like Christmas, right? It's like, whatever. Just another day.
Just another day, yeah.
And I don't know, that might be a cultural thing. I'm not too sure. So I wonder if some things get lost in translation. I'd be interested to see the subtitled version of this film. We did watch it dubbed, like I mentioned earlier, so we only had the dub performances, which, again, I thought were excellent. I really liked all the dubbing. I thought it was a really good job. But I'd be interested to see this film in its native tongue with subtitles. I'd be curious to see if the translation that way equates to the same that we got from the dub performance at times. And, it's hard to say, too, like as far as the cultural impact, because we don't have those Japanese experiences. And the last thing I'll just say, which is kind of weird, and it's whatever. It's not really a negative. It's just a thing I didn't like. I didn't like the dancing buildings at the end of this movie. When the credits hit at the end, the buildings start dancing when the credits start rolling. I didn't like that. That was weird. I don't know what it was. It felt like we had this whole like really serious, realistic, fun movie, and then we had dancing buildings out of nowhere. I don't know what that was about. That was a little weird. It's the credits, so it really doesn't matter. It didn't impact the story at all. Just a fun observation. I just thought that was kind of strange. Just have to admit, when you see something weird, sometimes you just got to point it out. I think we're ready to give our final scores. I'm going to give Tokyo Godfathers an A+. It's a masterpiece, this film. It really is. As far as an anime film and just a film in general, I think it leaps and bounds in a lot of ways. The themes are strikingly strong, way more powerful than you would expect in your typical Christmas movie. Is it an unorthodox Christmas movie? You bet. It definitely is. But at the same time, it captures the essence of what Christmas is. All those different themes that we've talked about throughout this whole season, just going over all the different movies we watched. This movie had a lot of those in it, and you can't really deny that. It took a lot of those storylines and told them in tighter packages and even a little better in some regard. It touches on taboo subjects, which are taboo for not only Japan, but in some cases even here. Nowadays we don't really touch on things like the homeless and the LGBTQ plus community still isn't a fully fledged thing. While we've shed some light on it on our channel, it's still not a fully accepted thing as much as we really want it to be. So it's interesting to see another culture's take and to see a story being told. This is a beautiful movie. The animation's beautiful. The story's beautiful. The characters are all likable in their own way and endearing. This is a holiday classic for me, and I'm not just being biased. I am a huge Satoshi Kon fan, but this is why he's such a legendary director. If you're to watch anime for the first time, in my opinion, I think, and you really have a strong appreciation for film, you got to check this out. John, where you stand with this film?
I give this film a B.
Okay.
I felt like it was a solid movie altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there were some things that I didn't understand.
Okay.
So
That's
it's
fair.
not getting me to the A+ level.
Right.
But altogether, I felt like it was a good movie. It was solid. It had a good plot. It was interesting. And it had told a different story than I was expecting.
Hey, if anything, I'm kind of just happy it made you admit that maybe there is something to this anime thing a little bit, right? Maybe there is something magical there.
Maybe.
If it did it, you know what? I'll take that. That's a small victory in itself. We'll make you an anime fan yet. Don't worry. But that being said, John, where can the people find us at home?
You can find us over on YouTube, The Real Movie Guys on YouTube. Go to our page, like our channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified when we put stuff up. You can also find us on Twitter, at TheReelMovieGuy on Twitter. You can tweet at us, let us know what you think about this movie. What are some of your other favorite anime movies? Maybe we'll do them too.
Yeah, let John know. Give him a recommendation list.
You can also listen to us on many podcasting platforms, such as...
Yes, for your listening pleasure, we are also available in podcast form at iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Overcast, Breaker, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Be sure to give us a listen at any of those fine places. If you already are right now, hey, greatly appreciate it. Just search out Real Movie Guys. We should pop right up. Thank you again so much for joining us for this episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin. That guy over there, he's John. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts.